Well, I'm Storm Team Chief Meteorologist Ashley Gann with the CBS 42 Storm Team. We are remembering a very major event that happened right here in Alabama, April 27, 2011. Hard to believe, 10 years ago. Massive tornadoes stretched across the state, causing damage and, unfortunately, significant loss of life here in the state. I remember that day very well. I was actually chief meteorologist down at the CBS station in Montgomery, and we were covering the storm, and because we had so many viewers that had either students or children that were attending the University of Alabama, we went on air with some live coverage. You can actually see some of the storm coverage behind me, the storm footage there, and I remember it being a very sobering day as a meteorologist, one that really humbles you, and I remember being on screen and stepping off. It was about 5 seconds. It seemed like an eternity, taking a deep breath and just knowing that lives were being lost that day. But we've come a long way since April 27th. We've learned a lot. Our communication has changed, and we've really improved our messaging to our viewers. So I want to start with you, Michael. Tell us a little bit. You've got roots here in Alabama. Tell us about that day for you.
Right, Ashley. I was in Greenville, Mississippi. That was actually my first job. And I remember getting off work that day because the same round of thunderstorms moved through Mississippi, getting off work and looking at the coverage. And as someone who is from the state of Alabama, I'm from Anniston, Calhoun County, Alexandria, it scars your heart, just knowing that you're so far away and there's nothing that you can do about it. I remember, to be honest with you, crying that evening, just watching it. And it was very difficult, and it's something that we as Alabamians will never forget. And one thing that always comes to mind to me, and the National Weather Service has kind of changed their process since then. And this should be reassuring to everybody in Alabama. The National Weather Service here in Birmingham, they don't issue a warning unless it's absolutely necessary. And we have to take something that we've learned. We have to take every single warning seriously. For that matter, we all know what happened on April 27, 2011, and research shows, and I still believe that in some way complacency became a factor. And that's only human nature for all of us. Let's say we go years or maybe your entire life without getting, for example, a speeding ticket. It's easy to not look at the actual, am I in a 35 mile per hour zone or a 45 mile per hour zone? And then all of a sudden, those lights start flashing behind you, and that's a gut check. That will cost you some money, higher insurance premiums, but that same type of human nature mentality when it comes to a tornado could cost you your life. Right. So that's why every single warning has to be taken seriously. And we look back at the Fultondale tornado, January the 25th. That tornado, that was a lower end severe weather threat, but it still happened. It was an EF3. There was a warning with that. And overall, the risk for tornadoes that evening, it was on the lower end. So that's why each warning, it has to be taken in a way where you need to go to your safe place. Take it serious, and just because maybe you've not been through many tornado warnings in your life, same thing with a speeding ticket, it could happen at any point.
And the messaging changed that day. So after April 27th, chief meteorologists across the state met together, and we said, what is our ultimate goal here? And it was to save lives. And at the end of the day, what we decided was that our messaging was going to be the same statewide, from the National Weather Service to all of the communicators out there, from emergency managers to folks on TV just like us, getting that message to the people, because our ultimate goal was to save lives. And I have to say that we've seen a dramatic reduction in loss of life in the last 10 years as compared to that one singular day. Now, tell us,
Well, I was saying, that day, that forecast was well forecast.
It was.
Days in advance, just leading up to it.
I remember having an eerie feeling in my stomach about it, just leading up to it.
Up to 6 days, it was like, something might happen that could get bad. And then as you got closer and closer to the 27th, obviously reality set in and we had it.
And you were in Baton Rouge at the time.
I was in Baton Rouge, so we were far enough south that I didn't have anything. But I remember it was a warm day, probably 85 degrees down there, and really, really windy. And for me, that means that's something sucking the moisture out of the Gulf of Mexico.
That storm system.
Right into the storm system. And then there was a three-part system here. I mean, we had the morning line, then there was the noon line, but it really didn't hit Birmingham, it was more Huntsville, and then the main show. And that was just the one that obviously is incredibly devastating.
Right, and Michael, to your point, I think when that morning line came through, a lot of people turned off the warnings for the rest of the day. They thought that was the big one, because that was Hackleburg. I mean, we already had a town that was completely wiped off of a map, and then Then you hit daybreak and everyone just goes about their day, not realizing that there was an entire another round.
Right.
And then I was in Montgomery at the time. We still had EF4 tornadoes that hit Lake Martin down there. And so, I mean, there were still significant tornadoes. It wasn't just Tuscaloosa. And I know it kind of gets named the Tuscaloosa tornado, but we have to remember there were major tornadoes that hit across the state that day. And this is something that's used to educate now. Up and coming meteorologists is something that we use every day.
Right, right. I mean, all of the examples that we went over in most of our meteorology classes are based upon this day. And the thing is, one challenge that I think we've really have to face as meteorologists with the messaging is that this event was so unprecedented and so just outstanding in every metric that you look at it, that most people will ask you now, for future severe weather events, how does this compare to April 27th? And the problem is, this event was just so unprecedented that it's just, you're never really going to see many things like this again for maybe another 30, 40 years. And how do we best convey that?
Absolutely. And one phrase that we find ourselves using too is that if a tree falls on a car or you have wind damage to your house, it could be your April 27th. It doesn't necessarily have to be mass destruction and casualty loss. But to your very point, I think
it only takes one.
It only takes one. And I think that that's where our messaging and being consistent to that has changed dramatically. And even how we partner with our emergency managers in the field. And I think that we do an excellent job of that now, even when we're on air, being able to get that messaging out to who it needs to get to, when it needs to get there, and doing it very, very quickly.
Right, and it emphasizes, you know, I think the one thing we've definitely learned is just the importance of having one cohesive message all together as emergency managers, operational meteorologists, and broadcast meteorologists. Obviously, we're allowed to have our own opinions on forecasting severe weather events, but maintaining, you know, a cohesive message of what you need to do during a severe weather situation is just super important. And it's it really just kind of this event was kind of the is now kind of like our center of gravity for everybody now.
Yeah, it's like this precipice.
Everything from, you know, now helmets and shoes, and, you know, have everything in your safe place. You need a whistle in case you're trapped. You know, there's not only just the weather radio, but all these other supplies you may never have thought of before are now part of a normal, you know, in your safe place, what you have to have out there. And you have to be prepared. And the new thing, messaging out there now, be a hero. Call you up. Hey, Ashley, there's a tornado coming your way. Don't know if you know or not, but it's coming your way. And, you know, hopefully you know, but if you don't, you may have just saved someone's life.
I call the best warning water cooler talk. So if you're sitting at work and you're around the water cooler, you know, it's that kind of talk, whether it means calling somebody. But what we learned from that day, too, through some of the research that we've been actually partnering with University of Alabama on, is actually people need 3 layers of messaging now. They need 3 confirmations. Back in the day, as I say, you know, you just turn on the TV, and as long as the meteorologist was telling you one thing, that's what you did. But now with so many tools for communication, we get lost in it.
That's what they want to see.
Exactly.
And that's something I think that happened that morning. You alluded to the initial line of thunderstorms that came through. Some folks were out power. The outdoor weather sirens in many locations probably weren't working. And that's something that we emphasize over and over and over again. Do not rely on outdoor weather sirens because they are not meant to advise you. First off, if they are working, they're not going to give you any type of information. You're just going to hear this loud sound coming from the background if you hear it at all. So that's why you have to have a NOAA weather radio and our CBS 42 weather app. And there are multiple platforms to receive those warnings, and you just have to have those and pay attention to the weather when we tell you that there could be tornadoes. Please don't go about your day as if it's a normal day because we're telling you that there could be tornadoes.
Well, look at a couple weeks ago. I mean, we had not quite the extent of the strong tornadoes, but long track, big tornadoes, we're all covering them. I mean, we're still going to see them.
Impacted our family directly.
Right.
As a matter of fact, we still have trees on the ground. So,
so, I mean, you got to get the messaging out there, which is key. And not least the technology is in 10 years. I mean, from the forecasting standpoint, what we have to look at tool-wise,
all these radar products we have
we didn't
now.
have that.
It's unbelievable now, all the information
and
we
it just makes our job, I don't want to say it easier, because there's a lot more data to go through, but you can say, okay, this makes it easier to point out where the tornado is. Here it is, the proof of where it is. You know, we can actually show the debris now on the radar in the air. We can show you the video here too. So that's 2 things. You know, then you hear the tornado warning, there you go, there's 3. Makes it a lot easier to get to that number.
And don't pay too much attention to whether it's a slight risk or a moderate risk, because guys, correct me if I'm wrong, the Fultondale tornado, it was a slight risk. It was a lower end threat, but yet we still had an EF3.
non-zero, but
and it's easy to say, okay, this is a 1 out of 5 or a 2 out of 5. If it's a 2 out of 5, maybe I don't need to pay attention to it.
Right.
So it's important that you pay attention to every single severe weather outlook and always expect the unexpected. That's the rule. And we expected the possibility, Fultondale on January the 25th for a tornado to pop up. It did. It developed very quickly, and Fultondale was impacted in a major way that will impact, livelihoods for years to come. So pay attention to every single warning.
And understand the difference between a watch and a warning. Watches mean the conditions are favorable, and then your warning means that the danger is imminent. So just making sure that you have all those tools in your toolbox and the resources to make the best decisions for you and your family. And I think that's really our big takeaway from April 27th. It's definitely a day. Not only did we learn a lot as meteorologists, but I would say we also learned about the resilience of this state as well.
With all the lives lost, but everyone's there picking up, cleaning up, offering a helping hand. What do you need? Do you need a rebuild? I'll help you rebuild as much as I can.
Right.
And
the stories are endless too.
Right,
we could be here all day, all night talking about
But that's
this.
what's so great about the state. Is that you just, we know this is part of life.
Right.
You don't like it. We don't want to deal with it,
Right.
but it's part of life here. And so if you're going to be dealing with that, we all work together, to help each other when we need to.
Like I said, it didn't matter whether you're
Auburn fan or Alabama fan.
I still remember.
All right, you guys, separate it up.
But it didn't matter.
Auburn took a busload. I believe Gene Chizik was coach at that time. Took a busload of the entire team up to Tuscaloosa, and they all came together. At that point, football didn't matter.
Doesn't
That's
matter.
right.
It was about helping out each other.
I really think you saw the heart and the fiber of the state.
Yeah, and that whole day was just tragic in terms of all the damage that it caused, but sometimes hugely catalyzing events like that is what brings people together, and it was none is a better example than April 27th. It's just amazing how much people came together that day.
Very well said, Griffin. Well, for Griffin, Dave, Michael, I'm Ashley Gann. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion on April 27th as we remember this day from 10 years ago.